Welcome to Making Memories. This is Lynda Wright. Today is April the 25th, 2008, and I'm here today with Kathryn Hall and Ira Andrews.
Well, I'm Ira Andrews. I'm a class of 59, and folks might wonder how it is that someone who had been at the college for 43 years professionally came to be there. My tenure at Randolph-Macon began in a very unexpected fashion. I had gone to theological school and thought I was going to spend a life in the United Methodist ministry. But mid-year, in December of the first and only year that I spent in a local parish, I received a telephone call from the president of Randolph-Macon College, a friend, certainly my college president, J. Earl Moreland, inviting me to come to Randolph-Macon as a faculty member for a 3-year period. I was in a very good situation. My wife and I had a new baby, and the new baby had not been in that parish for many decades, and folks were really happy to have a baby in the parsonage. But after a period of hard soul searching and thinking, I agreed to come to Randolph-Macon for 3 years in 1963. We arrived at my appointment was as a member of the faculty, assistant professor, and Ann and I came in the summer of 1963, and what began as a 3-year tenure. 3-year commitment became a 43-year commitment. I jokingly say that when I entered Randolph-Macon at that point, after having graduated in 1959, I had a hard time finding the door out. But I did find the exit door in 2006. I served for 36 years in that period from 1963 to 2006 as Dean of Students, Dean of Men when we were all male, and then as Dean of Students. But during all that time, I maintained an appointment in the Department of Religious Studies and taught at least 2 courses a year during my time in the Dean of Students office. So, Kathryn.
Yeah, how did I get here?
How did you get here?
I'm looking for the exit door now. Well, I'm Kathryn Hall, and I've been here this is my 31st year, and I came way back in the 70s, 77. I went to an all-women's college, Radford, a small college, and got very involved in student government, and one of my mentors there happened to be the dean of students. And as I went off to get my graduate program, she called me one day, and she said she had a friend, and he was in need of having an assistant, and did I want to apply? And I said, where? And she said, Randolph-Macon College and Ira Andrews. And I did apply that first year, and I came down for an interview, and I was up at the University of Maine at the time. And remember coming down and interviewing, and there were so few of you. It was you, Ira, and Bill Gibson, and Russell Bourne. Got to talk to all of you and went back and didn't get the call to come that year. In fact, a delightful lady, Nancy Stanger, came out of the University of Virginia. I always thought you guys were prejudiced for Virginians, and I was at Maine. But anyway, I got a call not within several months, 7 or 8 months. Nancy got the opportunity to get married and to leave, and Ira you remembered me and called, and I came back and got hired. And in 77 started this long career here, and I'll never forget telling you, I said, I'm coming to spend just a couple of years. It was going to be one of those jumping off places to other careers. My family was in Virginia, and I just haven't found the jump-off place yet, but it's good to get back with Ira because he's been retired the last several years, and I've been over in the Dean of Students office, so it's fun to have this time to remember some of our memories.
Yeah, absolutely. That was the beginning of a long, wonderful personal relationship as well as a professional relationship. I think we were a very, very good team for a lot of decades, and it was great fun. And you're right. In those days, there were just very few of us in the Dean of Students office. How many on your staff right now, since you're serving as all this year as interim Dean of Students? How many do you have on staff?
It's interesting. full-time, part-time, we have 42 people serving in student affairs now at the college. And what are we, 2008? Compared to in the 70s when I came, you had, what, 4?
Well, yeah, in the 70s when you came, there were, as you indicated, there was, in addition to the speaker, there was a chaplain and Russell
Gibson.
Bourne, and that was it.
Yeah.
But in 1966, 66, 67, when I moved into administration, sharing a joint appointment in the faculty, I came into an office that had a secretary. And at that time, the dean of men, slash dean of students, the student personnel officer was it. There was one individual, and the tasks that now are done by members of the staff and the student affairs were devolved to the individual. Now that wasn't unique with Randolph-Macon; that was true across the board in the industry. But it is interesting that our responsibilities, and my colleagues across the state, and they were wonderful colleagues, as you know. You've already mentioned Bonnie Hurlbut, a wonderful woman at Radford, who was a great help to me, obviously, in getting you to apply for the job. We had relationships, and all of us in the 70s, in the 60s, did the thing ourselves. There were no staffs. The first thing that we did, the first break for us, was when Randolph-Macon went co-ed, because it became really, and that was in 71, 72, it became really important, obviously, since we were going to introduce women into the environment, to have a female. We were just beginning the whole process of the growth of feminism, and while women can serve men and men can serve women, we didn't know that then. So we felt really compelled to do that. Now, the interesting thing that you and I have talked about before, as Randolph-Macon prepared for coeducation and felt the necessity of hiring a woman in the Dean of Students office, which we did, B.J. Seymour, who is
B.J. was the first.
Who was interviewed in this process. At the same time, we did that. We went to a sister institution, at the time, West Hampton College. And we asked Jane Bell Gladding's colleague, I cannot think of her name. I should. I'm embarrassed. Her assistant, to come out here and help us work through what do we need to do to prepare for women. And we had a series of meetings, and this all took place in the winter and early spring of that year, of 71. Exactly, the spring of 71, because Luther, quote unquote, decided, the trustees decided to go ahead over Christmas break in that year. So we had less than a year. We had one semester to get ready for the introduction of female students. So we just moved like mad to do what we needed to do that. In any case, I was in the Dean of Students office by myself. We hired B.J. Seymour, and we had only the chaplain because we didn't get a counselor until a couple of years subsequent to that, when we hired Russell Bourne, who had done a master's degree at University
of Virginia.
Exactly.
I knew there was that prejudice for UVA.
Yeah, well, he was close, and he was involved in the PhD program. And when Russell came to open up an office of counseling and career planning,
started together, both of them.
The college helped Russell over a couple of summers to finish his doctoral program. I should also say that the college had someone paying attention to career planning. Merrill Barton.
Oh, yes.
Well, because that operation,
financial aid too, Merle.
Yeah, he did financial aid,
yes.
But that operation had its location in the alumni office.
Yes.
When I was here and when I came in the 60s, Roddy Jones had paid attention to it, and it was in the very early 70s. I'd have to go back and check. When the operation moved out of the alumni office, I haven't thought about that for a long time. And Merrill's hired in financial aid, and he took on the responsibilities as well of the career piece.
And then counseling took on careers.
Exactly. Then counseling took on the career counseling, or on the career piece.
Yeah,
exactly.
some of what we ended up having in the whole Dean of Students area resulted from coming from some other places. Same thing happened. Campus safety moved over from a business operation later on in the 90s. But so we inherited some tasks that appropriately should be in student affairs.
we didn't have a campus safety when I was here.
Oh no, we had big. When I came, we had Big George Stevenson.
The college didn't. When I was a student at Randolph-Macon, there was no campus safety.
Oh.
There was no office of campus safety.
Yeah. So when did when Big
That's
George?
a good question.
Did that happen?
Well,
to you?
it happened. It happened in the late '60s. Well, no, it happened when Doug Lawson was dean of students at Randolph-Macon. He was dean of students in 60, 61, 62, 60, until 65, 66.
Okay.
Yeah. Doug Lawson hired a campus safety person, and he hired a local man who was retired from the state police. His name was Ira. Good name. Ira Ratliff.
I met him. He was here when I came.
R-A-T-L-I-F-F, yeah.
Right?
Ira Ratliff, I think, maybe had been a captain in the Virginia State Police. He lived up on Chapman Street, and Ira came in and did Bob Kettner? Bob Kettner preceded Ira Ratliff, I think.
Had to, because
Yeah, he
Big
did.
George and then came Val Wright. Worked
but
together.
that's an operation that evolved.
Oh, yeah, it really
beginning in the 1960s. We had essentially Robert Kettner was a retired on disability officer from the Norfolk Police Department. He had been shot in the line of duty. His wife served as an attendant in the infirmary. And because when we had an infirmary, which is the building is no longer here. It was
the
beside
Ray Infirmary.
Yeah, the Ray Infirmary down the corner on what was in a corner of Patrick Street, entering
where the Brock Center is now.
Where the Brock Center is. Exactly. So Bob did campus watchman kind of thing, and his wife kept that
infirmary
going because we had a 10 or 11 bed fraternity infirmary.
That's right. Because when I came, it was staffed by 2 registered nurses, and then Mrs. Andrews, Jackie Andrews, stayed there at night and saw the students who needed.
Left, right.
And the doctors came for an hour, and so there's been a lot of evolution in student affairs. Yeah.
Well, we had a hard time in student affairs. I had a challenging time with colleagues on the cabinet, growing the office. Because as student body increased, needs increased, and what you read in the newspapers about citizens' demands as a basis for raising taxes on all of us, there were demands, and we felt we needed to make additions, but it was really difficult because times were really, really troublesome for the college with respect to finances.
Yeah. But I think we were very smart, because sometimes as those needs came, I remember when we needed to have our first live-on professional in res life, Anthony Keat came to do that, and we noticed as he came out of ECU that he also came and brought a lot of experience in multicultural affairs, and so we quickly tapped him to do both live on the campus, area coordinating, and help us begin to reach out to those students coming who were multicultural, and to build a program. And we did that. We did it on sexual assault in the same way. So it was interesting to see the needs drive the staff.
And that was an important appointment. You're right,
it really was.
Because the college was beginning to pay attention to minority recruitment and nurturing students of color on the campus. We didn't have very many students of color, but obviously the need was there to to nurture, sustain, and support those who were here.
Now, I remember our first, our fifth person after I came as the fourth, our next most important hire, you'll remember too, I'm sure, actually wasn't there. It was in student activities. There was an interest to have someone come to coordinate direct student activities, and that's when we reached out and found Mary Grace Walsh. Became our first director of student activities, and also Mary Grace was here when we started getting, women's sorority groups interested in the college.
That was after, wasn't that on Liddell's watch?
Yes, it was with Liddell
Payne. So that
Payne.
was after 1979, 80.
Yeah, Luther left a year after I arrived. Yeah, Liddell came in. So it sure was. Yeah.
Yeah, that was important because by then we had several hundred women students here.
Yes, we did, and an interest in having some services for women, and particularly on the Greek side. A lot of interest to have, and I think I'm going to be right. I think it's Phi Mu was the first one, very first one to look at us from the national office and say, Yeah,
that was an interesting transition when we went from male to female. We a week or two ago, I had an opportunity of interviewing of talking with a young man who happened to be the first, and I think maybe the only African American who's been president of student government.
Oh, who?
Dennis Howard.
Oh.
Now, the reason I mentioned Dennis Howard is because I remember the first female to be elected president of student government. You remember who that was?
Let's see, who was? Give me a clue.
Redhead.
Oh, a redhead.
Gail Google.
Oh, yes, Gail Google.
Wonderful woman.
That's right.
Gail Google. And I'm trying to remember when that we were thinking, how long did it take us from the introduction of women until into the student body, until there was enough support in the student body for a female president? Exactly. The country's still trying to figure that out, aren't we?
Yeah, we are, as national.
Yeah, and a lot of other things, too. Yeah, fascinating.
Do you remember when I came in the 70s, I was so fascinated by what this small college did, and I got tickled at it. Do you remember that in the Dean of Students office they had the class excuse policy, and you had these little slips of paper, and it was fascinating to me that not in the faculty's offices, and certainly not in academic deans, but the dean of students, you or I, every day, literally, and we get something like hundreds of these where students would miss class and they needed permission from the dean, and we'd have to sign those forms that would go into the faculty boxes. So a faculty member would say, if the dean believes you were sick or you were out for this reason, it's excusable. Remember those days?
Yeah, that's like that. Remember, I shouldn't say this, but it's like the child's game. Mother, may I?
Oh, it was. It was fascinating.
You're exactly right. We had our class the absence system was a cut system. Students were, by faculty rule, students were permitted to miss a class three times without if it met on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and they had two cuts if their class met on Tuesday and Thursday. That a change in the calendar that had been introduced in 1968 with a new curriculum. In any case, they had to document any absence beyond those three or those two.
Now, I was always...
we had to sign all those pieces of paper.
Yeah. Now, I was always fascinated we had to do that, but do you remember when we figured it out? A few years after I was here, instead of handwriting these, we got stamps. We got our names on ink pads, and so each day you'd look at them, and you'd do this. And I'll never forget the time I went downstairs into the faculty mailroom. It's the same one we still have today, and I ran into a professor, and he asked me about a student who'd missed his class, and the professor was Bruce Unger. And Bruce wanted some details about, not a lot, but he said, is it legitimate? And I'll never forget telling him, I said, well, Bruce, we get these every day, so we just rubber stamped it, but I'm sure it was legitimate. And I'll never forget, Ira, he looked at me and he said, well, I hope we have better deans working upstairs who take more time to look at those papers. And I've always remembered that. But eventually, a few years later, they did get rid of the class excuse system.
Yeah, they did. They did. That was an interesting time because that's when we had an infirmary.
Yes, it was.
We had a physician who came to campus every day, each of those 5 days for an hour.
But we had to check their list to see and still affirm it.
Exactly.
Amazing.
They would send a list the next day. They would send a list of whoever had been in the infirmary the previous day and whether the student should be excused or not. The physicians made a decision. So there were many times that the physician was in a verbal tussle with students about whether whatever the student had been was over in the infirmary about was legitimate or constituted a legitimate reason to miss class. I had lots of conversations with physicians then, Dr. Hill Carter,
Richard Lee,
and Richard Lee
down there,
exactly, about that. That was an interesting time.
Yeah,
But
that really
you're
was.
right. Faculty
Through the
expected,
70s, in the 80s, we changed that. I think.
faculty expected that students would be really careful about class attendance. And students then and now, like they are, they'll.
I was trying to think of other policies that changed, and I can remember when I came in the 70s, and of course, throughout all the decades, there has been drug usage in most colleges, and I'll never forget one time walking down to the motel dorms at that time.
The freshman village?
Yeah, the freshman village. Used to be called the motel dorms, which I was fascinated, and I want you to tell that story about, I always wondered why motel dorms, but I'll never forget walking down one, just as we used to do. We used to walk the halls a lot and say, "Hi, and how are you?" And this one kid came out, this young man, and he had this, and I knew what it was. It was a giant bong, and he was cleaning it in the water cooler. And I just thought, my gosh, they're so liberal here at this Southern college. Of course, we weren't, and we don't allow them to wash bongs. But it was fascinating to have that experience in the motel dorms.
And he found his way into the judicial system.
He sure did find his way into the judicial system. But I can remember with other things, when I came, we used to have on the campus, you could have kegs on the campus. That's changed for several years now. Remember, they used to have keg parties. And you and I have been to
not only keg parties.
Gosh.
I wonder if anybody else in these interviews will recall those days. But I'll recall it for posterity. We'll talk about Randolph-Macon warts and all. When I was a student and into the 60s, one of the major events of the year, perhaps the major event of the year, was Camptown races.
Oh, yeah.
In Hanover County, right up Ashland, up number 1 at Mannheim Farm, that took place always on the Saturday after at the end of the first full week in May, as I recall. It was a wonderful event, horse racing, and maybe there was a mule race associated with it on a Saturday, and folks would come from far and wide, thousands of folks. Well, that was a stimulus for lots of parties at Randolph-Macon, especially that weekend.
Right.
That was such a popular event that the next Friday, the Friday after that, and the Hanover Court was called Doodah Day, because over at Hanover Courthouse, all the folks who'd been arrested for doodahing had to go and stand before the judge to deal with the law.
Wow!
But the college had major events associated with the Camptown races, and there was the golden liquid flowed. Yeah, considerably. But we recall those days in a way with some nostalgia. There was a considerable amount of alcohol consumption.
It was,
and those are before the issues became an issue with American society, and the drinking age was raised to 21. Fraternity parties had keggers.
Yeah, they were. And, it was interesting. I've always been asked what was the difference, because we served together when 18-year-olds could drink in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so we did have young people coming to college and drinking and all. And then when it changed, now there's still drinking going on, and those underage are drinking. Back then, I never noticed, I think because it was, you couldn't do it. More people came to the attention. Back then, there was still the drinking, but we didn't have as much attention-getting behavior by individuals day in and day out, because it wasn't a taboo so much. It was a very interesting situation.
I think that probably is true. There wasn't as much attention gathering information.
Yeah.
I don't know how to deal with issues. How to respond to questions that sometimes people ask about how have students changed over these decades? Because while there have been changes, a lot has remained the same. So the changes haven't been fundamental. They've been changes of degree and changes that have been introduced by public awareness.
Yeah. And a change in a cultural society. You know, you go from your baby boomers, and you can name all these different decades and the studies and all, but when it gets down to it, you have 18 to 21-year-old students coming for 4 years through a college. And one of the most interesting things I always noticed was, as we kept staying and all, and we got older, that population stayed the same age. And it really had to ask you in a way to remember you're working with those same issues that the graduating class just experienced over the last 4 years, and you had to stay on top of that. And
yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
We were continually reinventing the wheel.
yeah, well, we were, and they were coming with the same types of issues and statements from class issues and roommate and relationships and all of that.
Yeah. One of the changes that wasn't a societal change, but one of the changes at Randolph-Macon, which I think was important and interesting, had to do with the area we're talking about. It had to do roughly with the area of student citizenship, how students comported themselves with respect to rules.
Mm-hmm.
In the early days, in the 60s, early days for me, when I was in the Dean of Students' office, the Dean of Students was a disciplinarian, among other things, among a variety of other things.
Mm-hmm.
I handled all infractions of the student
Code of
student conduct.
Yeah.
Exactly. And one of the interesting pieces that for me was, and I suppose that's when you had come on board, was moving from a student conduct situation in which we were the judge and the jury, as well as the investigator.
Absolutely, we did it all.
To a situation in which students had a considerable part of that.
It became a student-run system.
Exactly.
We had a student judicial panel that worked
Right.
with us, and they got to resolve some of those cases. The appeals process always stayed with the dean, with you, and it's now with the dean today.
Yeah.
But the actual system became student-run. You're right.
I'd have to go back and look at Fishtails or the Yellow Jacket to see.
I think that was in the 80s, too.
Was that late?
Yeah, because when I came, you were still doing some of those cases. Might have been the late 70s, but...
Well, I'm just wondering if Luther was present when we did that. And I was thinking maybe he was, then Liddell. I think it was then. That's something we ought to check on. I ought to do that just for my own interest. But I remember lots of changes and lots of conversation around that issue. Are we going to be accepted? Is our word going to be important in dealing with people, our peers who break our rules? Because SGA had some responsibility for making rules or for approving the Code of Student Conduct. Peter Benovich was president of student government, and I wish I could remember the year. I saw his picture in a photograph that Dennis Howard had, as a matter of fact. So that Peter Benovich, that would have been around 71, 2, 3 in that area. I'm not sure Peter was here when women were here. That's what I'm unsure of. But in any case, that's when they revised the Code of Student Conduct, and I think maybe that's when we began talking about students having a hand in
student-run systems. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was fascinating how that evolved, and I think one of the changes has been that students have really have stepped up to the plate and have taken considerable responsibility for that.
Right. Oh, I agree. And now we have that system, not only student-run, but we have a faculty staff student panel for the really serious infractions. So it's evolved into a well-disciplined
Any dissatisfaction about that now, since I've been gone?
No, not really. It's run pretty well.
Yeah. Another thing that changed in which an area in which student responsibility increased was in connection with Mary Grace Walsh.
Okay.
When Mary Grace came as Director of Student Life, you know where I'm going. What's the big change?
You're doing with the fact that Mary Grace would identify programs and budget and all, and then finally we ended up creating a student activity board. It was called at first your SAB, and it became our campus activity board today. And what happened is the same thing happened with judicial affairs. Students began making the decisions, how much money do we have, and they decided to bring in comedians and different shows, and rather than it being an administrative decision. So another example of empowering students.
That's a really good phrase, empowering students, and Mary Grace was good at that.
Yeah. very much so.
She wasn't the only one who was good at that. I think the two of us were pretty good at that too. But in any case, Mary Grace really was good with respect to empowering students on student activities. It was then that we were able to get a fairly significant, for the time, student activities fee.
Yes, we did start
that
that
idea was embraced by the administration and the trustees. So they had a fair amount of money for the late 70s to deal with. I remember then students had a let's do it ourselves sort of spirit, and I'm trying to think of a student who was head of the games committee. Tom Blue.
Tom Blue.
Yeah, Tom Blue and Robert Patterson.
Yep, when Robert ran the SAB. Yeah,
exactly. They created a student games committee, and they had a wheel. Didn't they have the wheel that made a wheel? They made a Wheel of Fortune.
They had a Jeopardy board.
Exactly. They made these things that were fantastic.
Yeah,
I mean, they were very real, just like watching TV. The games themselves, the big Wheel of Fortune. They had their own version. Who was Vanna White? I don't remember who Vanna White was.
I don't know who that was.
Was it? Wasn't Tom Blue's man White? Was it?
No, I don't think so. That's right. I forget who Tom married. I forgot her name.
She worked in the president's office.
She did, and helped as a resident assistant.
Beautiful young woman.
Alyssa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Alyssa Archer.
We'll go down memory lane, won't we?
Alyssa Archer. That's exactly right, Kathryn.
Now, Ira, do you remember some of the funny things students used to do, and we could talk about, always putting soap suds in the fountain. We never found out who did that, but they do that then and now. That still happens to us. But just some of the crazy things, especially around Hampton-Sydney. We've had the lions in front of SAE taken. We've had them painted Hampton-Sydney colors.
The lions were kittens.
Yeah.
But the Hampton-Sydney eagle was also a pigeon.
Yeah, that's true.
Because they've been sandblasted so many times.
There are probably things our students did up at Hampton-Sydney. That's for sure.
Well, I remember a funny thing about Hampton-Sydney, and I think it was prior to coeducation.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I'm thinking it was. I got a call one night late. Thank the Lord after you came, Kathryn. I did still get calls for a while, but after a few years.
Yeah, you passed that baton on.
The
My
call
phone number
went to
on.
someone else. But in any case, I got a call late one night. It was 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. And it was our Ratliff called, Bob Kettner called, and said, Dean, you really need to come over here. We've got a big problem. And because of some Hampton-Sydney guys here, and we think we might have trouble. So I got up, and I was over here in 5 minutes because I just lived up on Lee Avenue, and I rolled up into the Old Chapel parking lot. Uh-huh. There was a crowd of Randolph-Macon men surrounding a car, and inside that car, through the fogged-up windows, there were about 4 terrified faces of Hampton-Sydney students. And Randolph-Macon people were just about to rock that car and turn it over. That's what people thought. My. Those Hampton-Sydney students had come up here to paint buildings or do some mischief, and they were caught before they could get away from campus. So I persuaded the Yellow Jackets to cease and desist, and we let the Hampton-Sydney men go on their way.
Yeah.
But that could have been an interesting evening. There were interesting stories, and I'm sure some of those stories will be told in this project. One of which is this is before my time and before your time. Students were caught, and this is back in the 40s and 50s. When students would visit, if they were caught, they were in trouble. Students getting their heads shaved and then sent back to Hampton-Sydney or back to Randolph-Macon, having their bald head painted.
So you kind of knew who they were.
Well, when they got caught, yeah. I remember a Randolph-Macon student, I'll never forget him, David Perkins from Petersburg, Virginia. David, big boy, played basketball maybe. David got caught at Hampton-Sydney. Other guys who were with him were able to escape, but David got caught, and David went burning letters in a field. That was a fairly serious matter, but those things happened. Those things happened. Fun time.
But we still have some of those crazy things happening now, but not to that extent.
Well, we had the in those days in the 60s, we continued to have the bonfire.
Yep, we did.
And you all,
we still have
more recently, you've done a bonfire.
We have the bonfire.
Yeah.
We sure do. You know, something I want to mention, Ira, while we're sharing down memory lane, are some people, and I'm going to mention two that I was so blessed to get to know by going down to the old dining hall. Remember our old dining hall? You had Saga Burgers down there and all. Was Ambassador Childs and President Moreland. When I came here, we go to the dining hall. And I never forget, here were what seemed to me two older men, but they were so distinguished looking. And you could go right up and sit down. And I remember doing that a couple of times with Ambassador Childs and President Moreland. And I just had a brief amount of time to do that. But I'm sure you have wonderful memories. They were just a part of the campus.
They
so
were.
much so.
And that, what do you mean by the old dining hall, Kathryn?
Oh, the old dining hall. Right now, I think it's the new weight room.
Exactly.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
That old dining hall. Remember going in there, and it really looked like an old building.
Yeah, that's good. Now, it's interesting that our audio partner here raised her eyebrows. She doesn't know about the old dining hall.
That's true.
The old dining hall, as we'll recall, and it's fun to do that, is exactly what is now the weight room and athletic offices.
Yeah, it's football offices, and it's got a laundry room at one end for the campus.
Exactly. And you're talking about J. Reeves Childs, who was an ambassador to Saudi Arabia, I think, for the United States government. A wonderful man. There's a room upstairs in his building, which bears his name. And Earl Moreland, of course, was president from 1938 or 39 to 1960.
But, you know, so
66.
Commonplace. They obviously were very successful, but anybody could sit down, eat with them. They'd tell you their adventures, usually talk about Randolph-Macon.
Exactly.
Both of them would.
Yep.
And I remember some wonderful other folks that we both got to know on faculty. Al Acey, what a delight he was, worked in psychology. Conrad Sininsky, just a lot of neat people. James Henry in the print office. At Randolph-Macon, just to have so many memories of wonderful people that have come through.
And that's part of the
Love
fun
the
and
place.
interest in working here. It's the,
it is.
The folks with whom you spent your time. That's, I think, certainly not unique. But that's one thing that's really, I think, characteristic of this college.
Well, I think how you connected with them. It wasn't just administration. It wasn't just faculty. It wasn't just staff. These were people you knew as Conrad and Al and Dr. Moreland, even though you used that as a respect title. I mean, you got to really enjoy these folks. And physical plant, Lawrence Emerson and those wonderful folks. They were people to you. They were colleagues. And that's just a part of the treasure of this college.
I think it is. And
very much so.
I've often marveled that so many colleagues here have spent a lifetime here, essentially.
Yes.
Their professional life has been here. And I think that's a real strength, faculty and staff.
True.
And the older I get and the more I see changes there, there's a little, not only nostalgia, but I think we could lose something for students going forward, because one of the things that I think that makes colleges like Randolph-Macon unique is having folks there who span the decades,
right.
who have institutional memory. They are the institutional memory.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I do think it is changing. It's been interesting to watch the last 10 years at the college because many of the older faculty have retired, none the least of which has been you, and as we've had a younger faculty come, and in today's society, they'll probably have the same sense I had. They're here a few years and then off to a career, so that's going to affect a little bit that sort of atmosphere that we so cherish that we got to experience here at the college. It is changing.
Yeah, the hope is that they will find life here appealing, sufficiently appealing, and that there's support for them and what they're doing. That they put down their tent and say, "This is where I'll make my career." That's my hope anyway.
Yeah, that would be mine too.
We need
Great
fresh.
place.
Always need fresh influx of ideas. But from my perspective, you really need a strong core of folks who are committed to the institution. By the way, a concern I've talked to you about before personally is the number of Randolph-Macon alums who are on staff and faculty has been diminishing over the decades.
It sure has. Used to be quite a lot before, and we're down. And that's something to get them to come back and work at their alma mater.
Yeah, and my own personal and private take on that is that some attention should be paid to that. I think institutionally we should find a way to make ourselves attractive to alumni. We should go and find alumni in the academic world and invite them to come. I know that this is the age of national searches, yada, 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 which I fully support, but not totally. I think there's a place for people for whom this is home.
Yeah, to come back. I have to ask you, I'm going to get you on tape now, because we experienced for about, 12 or 15 years the results of the Secret Pumpkin Society. And I think it's time you go ahead and admit to the future people of Randolph-Macon that you were behind the Secret Pumpkin. Do you remember what that was? That Secret Pumpkin showed up every October?
In October, yeah, when we were still in downstairs in Peel Hall.
Right. We've moved more places than anybody else. I've been in 7 different places on this campus.
I don't know who was responsible for that.
You don't want to admit it was you.
No.
Yeah. But it was a neat thing because, as you recall, you'd come to work one day and in Peel Hall we used to have a switchboard in Peel Hall, and there would be this stack of like 10 or 12 pumpkins with this letter from the Society for Secret Pumpkins. It was actually gratitude and appreciation.
Students, that's right.
It would go to students, faculty, or staff whoever did this felt deserved a pat or a pumpkin for helping Randolph-Macon in some way.
What year did that? Do you know what year that began?
Gosh, it was through the 80s, and I know it ended in the early 90s.
Well, someone should do a little investigation.
The Society of Secret Pumpkins.
That would be interesting to know for the purpose of the college's history. Secret societies are okay.
Well, I know you and I both got one because I still have my secret pumpkin, not the pumpkin, that thing left, but the little card that they...
a card. Sometimes those little cards were in the shape of they were orange cards, maybe
pumpkin.
Put that into a pumpkin.
Yep, I know Liddell. I can name people, James Henry, through the years who got those. But that's just another way family was established at the place. People took on doing awards.
The President Lindgren used that phrase yesterday in a retiree luncheon.
About
he had the retirees back for lunch, and he talked about the college, which is a wonderful thing, is a good thing for him to do. Does it a couple of times a year, and he used that phrase. It's fascinating. He used that phrase to talk about this community. He talked about it as a family, and I think he's learned to do that because of his, as he said, because of his growing acquaintance with more alumni in distant places, hearing them talk about their experiences here.
Yeah, those formative years that they appreciated and remembered so fondly.
It's been like a family. Families fight a lot, and we've certainly had enough of that. But also, families have many more positive things going on within the context of a family than negative. And I think that's what they're saying.
Ira, I had one more memory. You and I shared it together. It was funny then, and it's funny now. It involved campus safety and your office and my office. And every year at any college, there's this report hazings going on in your Greek societies. And remember the year that we'd heard we had a good report that 3 fraternities were going to do something on this very night. And you and I, in our infinite wisdom, we said, well, why doesn't somebody stay up all night, and if you see something going on, respond. And I went over to see then the director of campus safety, who was Bill Wiley. You remember Bill Wiley? And I said, Bill, do you have a pair of binoculars? Because I'm going to join Kathleen Hotham and Julie Ciccarone, our 2 area coordinators, going to go over and sit downstairs in Wash Frank Hall. And if we see any activity on College Avenue, we're going to look out. And he gave me a pair of binoculars. And so we went over, spent the whole night, and in the middle of the night, you can imagine, I think it was around 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
Here it all started. There were things going at 3 houses, and I peered out. Well, we responded.
Phi Delta, Lambda Chi.
Right, it was Phi Delta, Lambda Chi, and I think it was I think it was Theta Chi. Theta Chi too. Anyway, we responded. The good news is they ended up saying they were sorry for some of the crazy, goofy things that they were doing to their pledges then. But I'll never forget. The next day there was an uproar. What are the dean's staff doing all this for? And the paper got involved, and they did a little article, and they went to Bill Wiley. And he said that he gave me, remember what he said? He said, I gave her all this good equipment. She had night vision binoculars. And the senior class picked up on that year, and they did a T-shirt. And
Yeah.
where is Dean Hall? Like, where's Waldo? And it has me with night vision binoculars looking at all those fraternities.
I remember that. I remember that.
And we got good press and bad press. It upset some people, but too, as well, who thought, do you do that? But we only did that one time, and I'll never forget, looking with that good information we got.
Yeah, that was interesting. Bill Wiley.
Yep.
There's another name out of the
And
past.
he was an ex-Marine, so he thinks all binoculars are night vision, and they weren't, which was kind of funny.
He served in Vietnam, and he had a long career with the military.
Yeah. So that was a great memory. Ira, what's some of our final thoughts that we have? We always talked about how fortunate it was with the crazy things young people do between 18 and 22 that we didn't. You served. I hope to also finish serving. That we didn't have some major catastrophe happen. We've had a fire in a fraternity house. Nobody got seriously hurt. They were away for break. But we always talked about not having that silver bullet experience that some of our colleagues in our profession have had at their institution.
Enlivening. He is just had a terrific sense of humor about life. He could crack a joke and not crack a smile. Pablo Miller was a great guy. He used to wear a rumple suit. I remember as a student, he married
laughed at that, didn't you?
Paul Miller's rumple suit. Oh yeah, these people are really important.
I would just end with saying there are probably three that come to my mind when I think of humor. And these three evolve in this way. It would be Jay Pace, that I got to know because you and Jay had the wonderful barbershop quartet and just singing. And Jay always told me that story about you all going down to the Gospel Chicken House. And he told me two things I had to do in my life in Ashland was go to the Gospel Chicken House or the Pentecostal church camp. But he had a wonderful sense of humor. You couldn't be around Jay Pace that you didn't see someone who loved this college deeply but had a great sense of humor. So he was a joy to know and somebody that I always got lifted by. But another person I'll mention who always would check on me year in and year out was your first assistant dean of students, Betty Jean Seymour. B.J. Seymour would always go, how's it going working with Ira? And she kept asking me, and I kept wondering, why do you keep asking? And she would say, I don't see how you do it. It's a challenge to work with Ira. And I would say, and Betty Jean was just, BJ was so supportive, and what a great teacher
she's a great
and
person.
colleague. But I will end by saying my mentor has and always will be you. You are the epitome of a small college dean, and just thank you for all those years.
Well,
and for mentoring me.
You've been a great colleague. No one could have asked for a better associate dean of students and friend.
Well, I appreciate it.
No one could ask for
and
it.
I'm going to try to follow you and find the exit door in just a few more years.
Well, good for you. Good for you.
Thank you so much, Dean Hall and Dean Andrews.